Hi everyone. Today I wanted to take a look at a songwriter who was one of the first to write primarily for film, received 11 Oscar nominations and 3 wins, and had more top 10 songs on the Your Hit Parade radio program than any other songwriter, with a total of 42. But despite this incredible success, he is virtually unknown today, especially compared with some of his contemporaries, such as Cole Porter, Rodgers and Hammerstein, and Irving Berlin, who was second on that hit parade list, with 33 songs making it into the top 10. So, let's take a look at the life, music, and legacy of a man described by critics as the invisible man of Hollywood music, Harry Warren. Harry Warren was born Salvatore Anthony Guaragna to Italian immigrants in Brooklyn, New York, on December 24, 1893. His father, a bootmaker, changed the family name to Warren only a few years later, and when he started attending school, he was registered there as Harry. Harry was the youngest of 11 siblings, all of whom enjoyed music and often sang together, but who also had no formal music education at all. Their parents couldn't afford music lessons for their children or even a piano for the home. But that didn't stop young Harry, as he taught himself how to play his father's old accordion, then learned a bit more about music by singing in a church choir. He eventually also learned the drums and even dropped out of high school at the age of 16 to play drums in a traveling carnival. With the money he earned from that venture, he bought himself a second-hand piano and taught himself to play it by ear. By 1915, he was working at Vitagraph Studios, an old silent movie studio based in New York, where he did everything from managing props to assistant directing. He even occasionally acted in small roles as well. But he continued his association with music during this time by also playing mood music on the piano for the actors on set, just like we see Gene Kelly and Donald O'Connor do at the beginning of Singin' in the Rain.
Keep that mood music going. Okay, now, Phil, you come in.
In December 1917, Harry Warren married Josephine Winsler, and they had their first child, Harry Jr., shortly after. And they would go on a few years later to have a second child, a daughter, whom they named Joan, but always called Cookie. It was around the time of his wedding that he joined the U.S. Navy and began to write songs. His first effort, though not published, was appropriately titled, How Would You Like to Be a Sailor? And another early song of his, I Learned to Love You and I Learned My ABCs, actually earned him his first job in the music industry. In 1920, he had the opportunity to play the song for 2 employees of Stark & Cohen, a music publishing company. They liked it enough to set up a meeting between Warren and their boss, Ruby Cohen. And while Cohen didn't like the song enough to publish it, he did offer Warren a job as a song plugger. But Harry Warren, inherently shy and somewhat of an introvert, didn't love this work, which consisted of peddling songs to singers and entertainers. Warren once said that he didn't like having to go backstage and see these performers, many of whom were brusque. They affronted me, and I'd be standing there like a wet moccasin. So he continued to write songs, hoping for a future in songwriting. Finally, in 1922, Warren published his first song, Rose of the Rio Grande.
Rose of the Rio Grande, rose of the borderland, you'll claim it, I'll name it, Rose of Rio Grande.
After this, he had a steady stream of songs published, some of which became quite popular. He had 2 hits in 1923, Home in Pasadena and So This Is Venice, and by the end of 1924, Harry Warren had published a total of 10 songs. He followed this up in 1925 with such hits as I Love My Baby and Seminola, and then another half dozen songs or so in 1926 alone. Throughout these early years, Warren worked with several different lyricists, including Edgar Leslie, who provided lyrics to his first 2 songs, and Mort Dixon, who, in 1928, came up with the idea and lyrics to Warren's biggest hit to date, Nagasaki.
Hot ginger and dynamite, there's nothing but that at night. Back in Nagasaki where the fellas chew tobacco and the women wicky-wacky woo. The way they can entertain would hurry a hurricane. Back in Nagasaki where the fellas chew tobacco and the women wicky-wacky woo.
During the next few years, he also worked with lyricists Irving Berlin, Gus Kahn, and Al Dubin, the last of whom would, in the near future, become a longtime writing partner. Also in 1928, Harry Warren moved to the Jerome H. Remick Publishing Company, a move which would soon cause a major change in the trajectory of Warren's songwriting career. See, in 1927, Warner Brothers had a huge hit with the first major sound film, The Jazz Singer. Buoyed by the success of this film and the songs it contained, Warner Brothers began looking for other songs and shows to feature in and as their new musical films. This led to Warner Brothers purchasing the New York music publishing houses of Whitmark, Harms, and Remick, Harry Warren's employer. And one of the first Broadway shows they decided to turn into a musical film was the Remick-published Rodgers and Hart musical, Spring is Here. But in transitioning this musical to the screen, they decided to keep only 2 of the original songs and asked for Remick songwriters, one of whom was Harry Warren, to write a few more songs for their film version of the musical. In explaining why the studio would take a successful Broadway show and jettison most of the songs that helped it become a success, a practice copied by other studios in many subsequent films, Harry Warren once said, "The studios owned the music publishing houses, and there was more money for the studio in pushing the hit songs from the original and trying to get some new hits to go along with them." So Warren was sent out to California in 1929 to fulfill this request for additional songs, and ended up writing 7 new songs for the film, although only 6 were ultimately used, 3 of which became somewhat popular afterwards. But he didn't particularly like Hollywood at the time, complaining that many of the people who worked on the films didn't care much about the music or songs featured in those films. He said once that while filming a musical number for Spring is Here, he mentioned to the producer Hal B. Wallace that they were doing the lyrics wrong. But Wallace just responded, "What's the difference? Who knows the right lyrics?" And when Warren pointed out that they were going to publish the songs and the right lyrics would be available, it apparently seemed to make no impression on him at all. Warren also pointed out that at that time, Hollywood was much smaller than it would end up becoming. He said, "Hollywood looked to me like a small town in South Dakota, and when you finally got to Warner's studio in Burbank, you could look out through the windows of the music department and see nothing but empty land. All I could think about was New York." So, after the film was finished, he returned to New York and began writing songs and scores for Broadway musicals. There were a few more requests for Harry Warren to come out west to write music for movies, but he resisted, and the movie musical actually declined quite a bit in popularity from 1929 to 1932. But then in 1932, a new idea and style of musical picture led to a new opportunity for Harry Warren. Darrell F. Zanuck, head of production for Warner's, realized that movie musicals needed fluidity and a fusion of cinematic and musical techniques, and decided to try out his theory on a new story he had bought called 42nd Street. For this new film, Warner's brought out Warren, along with lyricist Al Dubin, and they turned out 5 new songs, 4 of which would go on to become major hits, including the incredibly popular and still recognizable title song.
Come and meet those dancing feet on the avenue. I'm taking you to 42nd Street. Here's a beat of dancing feet. It's the song I love, the melody of 42nd Street. Little nifties from the 50s, innocent and sweet. Sexy ladies from the 80s who are indiscreet. Oh, they're side by side, they're glorified. Where the underworld can meet the elite, 42nd Street.
Released in March of 1933, 42nd Street was a huge hit, thanks in large part to its impressive musical numbers with choreography by Busby Berkeley and, of course, music by Harry Warren. The film revitalized the movie musical and led to it becoming one of the most popular movie genres for the next 30 years. It also ended up leading to Harry Warren's ascendancy as one of the most popular and prolific composers of songs and music for films. For the rest of the decade, Warren wrote scores of songs for dozens of movie musicals, most of which achieved great success and popularity. He wrote songs for all the films in the 1930s Gold Diggers series, including We're in the Money and the huge hit Lullaby of Broadway, which won Warren his first Academy Award for Best Original Song.
Sleep tight, baby, sleep tight, let's call it a day. Listen to the lullaby of old Broadway.
Other song hits from Warren's time at Warner's include Remember Me from 1937's Mr. Dodd Takes the Air, and Jeepers Creepers from 1938's Going Places, both of which were nominated for Best Song at the Oscars, as well as the beautiful I Only Have Eyes for You from 1934's Dames, which would go on to become a popular standard.
You are here, so am I. Maybe millions of people go by, but they all disappear from view. I only have eyes for you.
During this time, Warren's lyricist was almost always Al Dubin, and these two produced such high-quality songs that choreographer Busby Berkeley insisted on having Warren and Dubin supply songs for all his production numbers, even though some of the films he worked on had scores by other composers. But despite Warren's success at Warner's during the 30s, by the end of the decade, things began to change. Although Warren was the primary song composer for 4 Warner films in 1938 and contributed songs to 2 more, that year marked the end of a number of associations for him. Personally, he lost his teenage son, Harry Warren Jr., to pneumonia on April 2nd. And professionally, Warren's partnership with Al Dubin ended due to the latter's alcohol and drug problems. Although Warren kept on at Warner's for 2 more years, writing many of his subsequent songs with lyricist Johnny Mercer, he ultimately opted not to renew his Warner contract after 1939. After leaving Warner's, Harry Warren thought his movie career was over. He said, "We had no idea there would be another cycle of musicals. In fact, it looked as if it was all over. I was on the verge of going back to New York, which I'd wanted to do ever since I got here, and write for the theater." Fate had other ideas. 20th Century Fox, headed by Darryl Zanuck, who had brought Warren to Warner Brothers 8 years before, decided they wanted a chance to work with the prolific composer, and so, in 1940, they signed Harry Warren. With lyricist Mack Gordon, he wrote several new musicals, many featuring the leading swing bands of the day. Warren's most successful work of 1940 came on his second Fox feature, Down Argentine Way, which produced the almost title song, Down Argentina Way, which ended up becoming his 4th song nominated for an Oscar. Another major hit came the following year in 1941 with Chattanooga Choo Choo, written for Sun Valley Serenade. It was performed in the film by famous band leader Glenn Miller and his orchestra, and his recording of the song actually became the world's first gold record after it sold 1.2 million copies, although at the time this was more of a publicity stunt than an official Recording Industry Association award. This song was also nominated for an Oscar at the 14th Academy Awards. The next year, Glenn Miller also starred in the film Orchestra Wives, which introduced one of my favorite Harry Warren songs, I've Got a Gal in Kalamazoo, which also garnered an Oscar nomination, Warren's 6th. This song was also bolstered, as was Chattanooga Choo Choo, by an excellent dance number in the film, performed by the amazing Nicholas Brothers.
A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I got a gal where in Kalamazoo. Kalamazoo, I don't want to boast, but I know she's a toast of Kalamazoo. Zoo, 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 zoo.
The following year, 1943, was Warren's last with Fox, but he ended on a high note as the dreamy ballad You'll Never Know from Hello Frisco Hello won Warren his 2nd Academy Award and became his all-time bestseller in sheet music.
You went away
my heart went with you. I speak your name in my every prayer. If there is some other way to prove that I love you, I swear I don't know how. You'll never know if you don't know now.
At this point, Warren had been nominated for a Best Original Song Oscar in every year since 1935, except 2, for a total of 2 wins and 5 additional nominations. And he wasn't even close to being done. His time at 20th Century Fox, on the other hand, did come to a close that year. Warren, again, initially thought he might head back east, saying, "When I left Fox, I still thought I might get back to New York and write for the theater, but the fates pinned me down in Hollywood." And according to Warren, it was all because of one man, Arthur Freed, former lyricist of such hits as Singin' in the Rain and Broadway Melody, and at this time producer at MGM. When describing how he ended up at MGM, Warren said, "Freed was the greatest producer of musicals because he loved them and because he was himself a songwriter. It was a case of the right man in the right place at the right time. He had told me for years that he wanted to work with me as a writer, but the circumstances were never right. When he became a producer at Metro, I was locked in by Fox, but when I was free, he couldn't get me there fast enough." But Warren's work at MGM, which began in 1944, is interesting, with many of his songs and films unable to achieve the success of his earlier work or many of MGM's other musicals, and his feelings about his time at the studio seem a bit contradictory. Now, early into his tenure at MGM, Warren did score a major success with the release of the Judy Garland starring The Harvey Girls, for which he wrote 7 songs, including the hit on the Atchison, Topeka, and the Santa Fe, which earned Warren his 3rd and final Oscar win for Best Song.
When I'm old and gray and settled down, if I ever get a chance to sneak away from town, then I'll spend my busman's holiday on the Atchison, Topeka, and the Santa Fe.
But while he did write songs for the last Fred Astaire Ginger Rogers film, The Berkeleys of Broadway, and the lavish revue-style Ziegfeld Follies, both of which were well received, and the latter of which featured his beautiful number, This Heart of Mine, most of the other films on which he worked while at MGM were not as successful, either as a film overall or with regards to the music specifically. Films such as Summer Holiday, Pagan Love Song, Texas Carnival, and The Belle of New York were disappointments financially and critically, and yielded no great song hits from Harry Warren. A slightly more successful picture came in Judy Garland's last MGM film, which also starred Gene Kelly, 1950's Summer Stock. However, this film highlights an interesting issue, which Warren faced multiple times while working for MGM. While he wrote 6 songs for the picture, and the film and some of these songs were somewhat well received, 2 songs were added in later by other songwriters, and the standout number from the film is a much earlier song, written by yet another composer and interpolated into this picture. Get Happy was originally written in 1930 by Harold Arlen, music, and Ted Koehler, lyrics, and is perhaps the most famous example of another composer's song being interpolated into a film featuring songs primarily by Harry Warren. But this issue of interpolation happened to Harry Warren while at MGM 3 other times as well. One of these came in 1950's Pagan Love Song, where the title song, originally written by Natsio Herb Brown and Arthur Freed in 1929, replaced Warren's original title song, Tahiti, and even led to the name of the film being changed. It happened again in 1952's Skirts Ahoy, which featured the 1919 novelty song Oh by Jingo, sung and danced to by Debbie Reynolds and Bobby Van, and it had also occurred in an earlier film, 1949's The Berkeleys of Broadway, where George Gershwin's beautiful ballad, They Can't Take That Away From Me, was interpolated into the picture. Harry Warren didn't appreciate these interpolations, saying, "There isn't a composer alive who likes having a song by someone else interpolated into his score." And after it had happened to him multiple times, he stated, "I felt myself falling out of love with the studio." He also took issue with the way MGM was handling his songs, arguing that they weren't promoting them as well as they should and getting enough play on the material. But these issues and quotes seem to stand in contrast to other comments Harry Warren made. When looking back at his time at MGM years later, he apparently remembered it favorably, saying, "Working for Mayer was a pleasure. He was the best boss I ever had. I liked him, and I liked my years at Metro." But regardless of his feelings about his time at MGM and the dichotomy between his general feelings about the studio and his specific issues with how they treated him and his music, he didn't stay there much longer, leaving after Skirts Ahoy was released in 1952. After leaving MGM, Warren was brought over to Paramount, initially for just one film, by crooner Bing Crosby, but ended up staying there for almost a decade due to comedian Jerry Lewis. Bing Crosby had asked for Warren specifically to write several songs for his 1952 musical, Just for You. Featuring a large score of 11 songs, the film did moderately well and even received a Best Song Oscar nomination for Zing a Little Zong, Warren's 9th nomination. But it was his next film that ended up introducing to the world the Harry Warren song that is perhaps most recognizable to the average person today. 1953's The Caddy was a musical comedy starring Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis in their 10th film pairing, which featured 6 songs, all written by Harry Warren with lyrics by Jack Brooks. But the song that was the biggest hit from the film, earning Warren his 10th Oscar nomination, is the humorous mock Italian song, That's Amore.
When the moon hits your eye like a big pizza pie, that's amore. That's amore. When the world seems to shine like you've had too much wine, that's amore. That's amore. When you are in a dream, but you know you're not dreaming. Signore, che bevo? Prendilo. Scusami, but you see, back in old Napoli, that's amore. Signore, that's amore.
Although this song didn't win the Oscar, losing out to Secret Love from Calamity Jane, it was a huge hit for, and is still associated with, Dean Martin, is arguably Harry Warren's most recognizable song for people today, and in the words of one critic, even helped rehabilitate Italy's image as a land of magic and romance after its association with fascism during World War II. Interestingly, this song wasn't even originally going to be in the film. Harry Warren said that initially they were going to use some traditional Italian song like O Marie. Warren continues by explaining that he and lyricist Jack Brooks thought this was a wasted opportunity, and we prevailed upon Martin and Lewis to let us try something new. If they didn't like it, they didn't have to use it. We didn't have any trouble with That's Amore, and it became a smash seller for Dean. Over the next several years, Warren continued to write songs for several pictures at Paramount. He had no contract there like he did during his time at other studios, instead working on a picture-to-picture basis. But he stayed busy there at Paramount due primarily to Jerry Lewis. Lewis liked Warren and his music and often requested him to write the songs for his pictures. As a result, Warren wrote primarily for Jerry Lewis films for the rest of the decade, although there were a few exceptions. These included 1955's Marty, for which he wrote just the title song, 1956's The Birds and the Bees, and 1957's An Affair to Remember. It was the title song for this picture which earned Harry Warren his 11th and final Oscar nomination. He also finally got to try his hand at another Broadway musical during this time, with 1956's Shangri-La, although it was not very well received and ran for only 21 performances. The last film for which Harry Warren was hired to write multiple songs was the 1961 Jerry Lewis comedy, The Ladies' Man. Although he wrote individual title songs that just played over the credits for a few films after that, he never again wrote multiple songs that fit into the storyline of a film. And outside of film, he didn't have much success either. He composed the music for a Catholic Mass with a Latin text in 1962, but it wasn't performed in public until 1980. And he also wrote music for the Miss Oklahoma pageant in 1964. But the opportunities to write new songs just weren't very widespread at this point, due to a decrease in original movie musicals, as well as just changing musical tastes. But although opportunities for new songs weren't very forthcoming, Warren's past hits still maintained their popularity fairly well, with multiple new covers of his older standards being recorded by a variety of groups and in many different styles. The Flamingos had the biggest hit of their career with their top 10 rendition of I Only Have Eyes for You in 1959. The Dave Clark Five made it into the top 40 with their version of You Must Have Been a Beautiful Baby in 1967. And Tuxedo Junction had a disco-flavored top 40 hit with Chattanooga Choo Choo in 1978. There was also a resurgence of theatrical interest in Warren's music during this time. There were a series of unrelated musical revues put on by regional theaters in various cities in the late 1970s, which featured Harry Warren's music, one of which in Toronto actually featured a young Martin Short. And in 1980, a stage adaptation of 42nd Street opened on Broadway. It used the film's score plus other Warren songs and ran for over 3,000 performances, making it one of the most successful musicals in Broadway history. Then, that same year, at the age of 86, Warren was approached to write the songs to a new original movie musical. The film, to be directed by James Bridges at 20th Century Fox, was titled Manhattan Melody, and seemed as if it might serve as a glorious swan song for the aging songwriter. Unfortunately, it was while he was working on this film that he passed away on September 22, 1981, at the age of 87. A further tragedy is that, even though he had already written several songs for the movie, the film was never produced, although some of the music he had composed can be found in the Harry Warren Papers at the Smithsonian. Throughout his life, Harry Warren was a prolific composer, publishing over 500 songs, which appeared in over 300 films, not to mention over 100 Looney Tunes and Merry Melody cartoons. He won the Oscar for Best Song 3 times and was nominated 11 times, and no other composer can match his record for the almost 30-year period between 1932 and 1961, when he was employed by all 4 major Hollywood studios, Warner Brothers, 20th Century Fox, MGM, and Paramount, during this time when they were specializing in producing high-quality original movie musicals. And yet, despite this success, he was still relatively unknown by the general public, even during his heyday. This relative anonymity was probably due to his modest and somewhat shy nature, but it belies a huge body of incredibly popular work. This dichotomy is summed up well by Ray Heindorf, orchestrator for Warner Brothers, who worked often with Harry Warren, when he stated, "In the first place, the man is a genius, and secondly, you're never likely to meet a man who acts less like a genius. He was always an easygoing, sweet-natured man, and maybe a bit too humble for his own good. If he'd had more ego and drive, he would be a lot better known. But what he did have was this incredible gift for melody. You can have all the musical education in the world and still not be able to write a good song. For that, you need a melody, and that's the hardest thing to write, unless you happen to be Harry Warren." Thanks for watching.
This heart of mine is gaily dancing now. I taste the wine of real romancing now. Somehow this crazy world has taken on a wonderful design. As long as life endures, it's yours, this heart of